See you there. Hi, welcome to ASP.NET Deep Dive. This is part 2 of what was started yesterday with Scott Hunter. This is now Damien Edwards.
Hey.
Yay! Damien owns ASP.NET, and we're going to go deeper into what we talked about yesterday. So hopefully, it's just disturbingly deep.
Yes.
Yes.
Is your clicker not working?
My clicker works. My clicker does not work.
Look at that.
There's my clicker.
There's your clicker.
There's where we are.
That's
all right, cool.
Awesome.
A QR code.
OK.
All right.
Are we supposed to do something with that?
We look at it and marvel at the technology. All right. And that's the slides.
There we go.
All right.
All right. So.
Good night, everybody. That button.
You wait.
Or maybe this other button. Let's try that one. Number 8.
We're good. OK. And it's a command prompt, because that's what we all want to see.
The font is too small.
You're going to make my window too big.
You sure?
I can zoom.
All right, zoom.
OK, I can zoom.
Just saying, it's very small.
So we're going to start out looking at the command line tools. I'm hoping most people were here yesterday when you looked at sort of the introduction, or you've at least seen some of ASP.NET 5 before. This is a deep dive. We're going straight in. So when you install Visual Studio 2015 RC, you're going to get something on your path, which is something called DNVM, .NET Version Manager. One of the aspects of ASP.NET 5 and DNX, which is what we've built ASP.NET 5 on top of, is this ability to run on different versions of .NET, including .NET Framework and .NET Core, different businesses, and mono, those type of things. So I can look at DNVM and I can say list, and this gives me a nice list of the things that I currently have on my machine. I think you saw this yesterday. It's in my user profile. You can see the location there of where all that stuff is. But there are a couple of other commands as well. So we have DNX. This is the command that you use to actually execute your application, right? And you can see here it takes a number of variables. Generally, you need to say what path is my program in, DNX dot if you're doing it in the local folder, and then what command it is that you want to run. And that's pretty much all this does. Then you have DNU. DNU is sort of where everything else goes. It's the utility. It's how you build. It's how you package. It's how you create a deployment artifact so that you can push your website to a remote thing.
Is it doing the work, or does it like shell out to other things?
It does the work internally, but there's shared code. So for example, if you do a DNU restore, that's using NuGet under the covers as a shared
So this isn't a replacement for NuGet?
It's not a replacement for NuGet. In fact, there'll be sort of a one-to-one with what NuGet, the new version of NuGet 3, will be able to do and what DNU can do in terms of restore. But DNU can do more because it's intended for DNX.
It's a client of NuGet and then a whole bunch of other stuff.
That's exactly right. It's a client for NuGet, and it's also a whole bunch of other stuff.
All right.
OK, so when you choose which version of DNX you're going to use, it affects which ones of these commands you're using. So if I go back to DNV list and actually type it correctly this time, we zoom back in here, you can see that currently I have 100 beta 4 CLR x86 marked as active. Now, on your machines, when you install 2015 RC, this will not be the case at your command line. If I go over to the right, though, you will have an alias set up called default. Now, I think you showed this yesterday, the aliases, the text files off in that same folder that you can see there.
Right.
So in order to set one as being active, all I have to say is, let's zoom back down in, clear screen because I'm getting too close to the bottom. DNVM use default. That will set that aliased DNX version as my current DNX for this session.
For this command prompt?
For this command prompt. And you can see that because if I scroll over, it says bin to process path. OK? So if I want to make that persistent, I want to use this version forevermore.
So does that mean I could open 2 command prompts and run beta this and beta that, and they're totally different at the same time?
Yep, absolutely. I can say -p, and this time it added that to my path, both to the process path and the user path.
The user, not the system.
Not the system. We do have a flag, I think it's -g for system, but we don't generally recommend that. Generally, you just be doing this at a user level.
All right.
So I could change that if I wanted to. I could say, if I go back and say DNVM list, and then I say DNVM, we'll say use 1.0. Now, I don't have to use an alias, right? I can just say I want to use beta 4, and I want to use runtime core CLR instead of being the full CLR. So now if I went off and ran DNX somewhere now, it's going to be using the core CLR. But because I didn't do -p, if I close this and come back in, the other one will be active, and I can prove that. So I come in here. Let's go. Not that one. That's Visual Studio Code. Who's got Visual Studio Code installed?
Did you guys download Visual Studio Code?
Awesome.
Yes! Thank you. They can't hear the audience on the recordings, so it really just sounds like Damien and I are talking to ourselves.
Pretty much.
So like we'll tell a joke and it just lands flat.
So there I am, I'm back to active. I started a new command prompt. My active is still the one that was set persistently, not the core CLR that I
And there's core CLR, CLR, and then mono is a thing too.
Mono is a thing too. I have mono set up here, and I also have dev ones set up here, because I've cloned the DNX source code, which we'll talk a little bit about later on, and I've run a command that sets up so that I can run a development version of the DNX as well. Okay, so that's like the whirlwind overview of these 3 command lines that you'll have to get familiar with. We'll use them a little bit more in depth as we go through and do some other things in the talks.
Okay.
So let's go over to an app now, and let's talk a little bit about finding an entry point and what that means. So if you ever create a .NET console application, you'll know that when you compile it, you get an executable. And when you double-click that, you probably have a vague understanding of what happens, right? There's a little bit in the exe that tells the operating system this is a managed exe. I need to boot up the CLR now, or the OS does that for you, and then your executable runs. What does it call? There's a class called program, and there's a static void method called main. And so you'll often hear Fowler and us talk about the static void main method. It just finds your static void main. It's
just a convention. Like the thing runs because we've always done public static void main.
Correct. So we have a console sort of app equivalent as well in DNX. And I didn't use that right now. I'm going to use a web right now. But if you're using a console app, that will be your entry point by default. That's static void main, which gets created in that class. In a web application, which is what I've created here, you have something slightly different. You have this startup class. Now, you would have seen this if you've used any of our Katana stuff from previously, or of course any other demos you've seen for ASP.NET 5. In this world, the boot up and the startup sort of logic is a little bit different. In here, if I go into my project JSON file, you'll notice that I have commands registered in my project JSON file. And I think, again, you talked about this yesterday. So these commands are actually specifying entry points for my application, okay? Because a web app doesn't have a static void main.
Entry points plural.
Entry points plural. Yeah, so by default, in this one, I just have web because I chose empty. So if I'm going to run this from the command line, I need to say, well, how do I start it? There's no static void main. Microsoft ASP.NET hosting is a dependency. I pulled it in via a NuGet package. It has inside of it, effectively, a static void main. So I can configure a command so that when I drop down to the command line, I can run dnx.web, name of the command, and that will be used as my entry point. Now, the ASP.NET.hosting application, effectively, this is like Russian doll nesting, okay? It knows how to find, it's designed for web applications. So it's looking for your startup.cs class based on convention, and then booting up your application by newing this up and running those 2 methods there.
So the name startup is meaningful.
The name startup is meaningful.
Okay, so that's the public static void main for ASP.NET.
For ASP.NET, if you configure these commands this way. Now, you can configure other commands as well. So we saw EF yesterday. So if you've ever used the NuGet console manager to do like EF commands, migrations from PowerShell, we have a command line equivalent of that now written on top of this. And we'll write a little one of those later on so you can kind of see how easy it is to do that.
So when I run this from the command line, I'm running the same app in different ways, just like I can get into my house from the front door, the back door, the side door.
Yeah,
Same
exactly.
place, though.
Absolutely. And you can obviously NuGet in other packages that contain commands, and we'll do that later on as well.
All right.
And then you can configure commands in here to boot them up. So let's talk a little bit about DI. So
Dependency injection.
Dependency injection. IOC, sometimes called it inversion of control. And when we talk about these things, generally we have the concept of container. That's the thing that is sort of where all the things that I want to be dependency injected live. That's where they're registered. And it's also where things that want stuff ask, hey, can you give me something that looks like this? Type IFU. Okay? Now, we have DI baked in to DNX, which underlies ASP.NET. So I can use DI in this application. Let's do, what's the easiest way
In
to do
previous versions of ASP.NET, lots of more kind of advanced developers would say, inversion of control, dependency injection is really important, and they would bring in all sorts of dependency injection systems.
Yep.
You can certainly bring those in here as well, but we think that dependency injection is becoming mainstream.
Yes.
So it is baked in. You have to use it. You really ought to use it.
You really ought to use it.
You like that?
If you really, really don't want to, you can just new up objects perfectly fine like you always have. But if you want to get certain intrinsics from the system that are already being managed by DNX,
that's how you get it.
You need to get it from us. So that starts right up in startup. If you need to get something from the system, like I want to get iApplication environment, so I'm going to add a constructor here. And I can say I need, there's an interface that I know is provided by DNX. It tells me a little bit about the applications as it's running. I'm going to control.that in, call that ev, and then I'm going to assign that to a variable called ev, and I'm going to use control.dot again to save me typing. Okay, generate read-only field. So this is the standard sort of constructor dependency injection pattern, and there are certain points in a DNX or ASP.NET 5 application where you can do this. Because think about what's happening here. This will only work on classes that are being newed up by someone who knows how to do this. Right. We call this type activation. Right?
By the way, not everyone, you have to watch that in slow motion again at home. But it's kind of cool that he pushed control dot on line 18 on env, and then line 14 got generated. That's one of those little things where it's like, how did I never not always know that?
Yes.
And it will save you like 6 hours a week.
Especially if you start doing these types of patterns of constructor injection.
Absolutely.
So this interface, for what it's worth, is one that's provided by DNX. It's one of ours. It ships, and it gives you things like the base path and what current environment name you're running in and those type of things, a version of your app, et cetera, et cetera. So I can inject stuff into my startup class because that's where we boot you, but you can also inject stuff into things like MVC controllers, into Razor views, and also into tag helpers. In fact, let's show a Razor view very quickly because that's kind of interesting. I'm going to create a larger application because this one has no Razor in it. We'll go in here. OK, so we have a new feature in Razor. While this is restoring, I'm just going to go and do this. Now, I'm not going to start the religious debate about whether it's correct or not to dependency inject things directly into the view. All I will say is that personally, views have their own logic. It may not be business logic, but there is certainly logic involved in composing the HTML that gets rendered to the client. Sometimes you need to have services that abstract elements of that logic. Okay? So not everything always comes through the model, because it may have nothing to do with the actual data that's storing it. But architecture is up to you. Do what makes you happy. But we now have a new We now have a new Razor directive, which lets you inject things from the DI container directly into your view.
Anything?
Anything. Anything that's been registered in the DI container can be placed in here. So I can do the same thing here. Application, and I'll call that. And then the second name here is a property name. So I have to add a using, obviously, because I haven't done that. And I can do that directly in this file now. I could also do that in the global import file if I wanted to make this using everywhere. Previously, you had to do this in web.config, which was kind of horrible. It's Microsoft.framework.something, something, something, which I can't remember right now off the top of my head.
Is it over in the other?
It is over in the other thing. You know what? I can cheat. Because we don't have control dot, unfortunately. So I can do this. And I can do that. And I can say, there it is. I was very close. I come over to here. Place this in here. Oh. And then now what I'll get is an app-env property in my page. So if I drop down here and type app-env, you'll see now I actually have that property dynamically generated in my Razor page.
So even though you haven't compiled this and you're not running it right now, Razor's really smart and figured it out.
Well, it's because we've hooked up to Roslyn behind the scenes and all that type of stuff's going on behind the scenes.
Nice.
So the reason this is quite interesting is because our base class for Razor view pages now is not as heavy as it used to be. Just like our base class for controllers is now just a class with a bunch of stuff dependency injected in. Our base class for Razor views is pretty much the same. It's a base class that has a bunch of @injects by default. The class doesn't even have the HTML property. It's just @injected into that at runtime by default. So it means if you want to override the HTML property, I could call this HTML. Now, why would I do that? But now my HTML isn't the HTML helper anymore. It's my iApplication environment. I don't have to change the base class to change the opinions about the type of things that we ship in the box. Okay? It's a lot more hackable than it was before.
A lot more hackable. And this is the thing. It's all about choice. If you don't like some aspect of this, if there's a subsystem that offends you, put in your own subsystem.
I hope we don't offend you with our subsystems.
I'm offended by iLogging.
Oh, well, Speaking of iLogging, controllers is obviously another place where you might want to do dependency injection. Okay? So to kind of finish this out, let's have a look at how I would do that. I'm going to basically do the same thing I did before. I'm going to add a constructor.
Right.
And I'm going to take in a logger factory.
Is it all constructor? What if I want to do property injection?
Yes.
Meaning it's hackable. Do anything you want?
So out of the box, constructor injection is what we do. There are other DI containers that you can inject, that you can configure.
So I could even use one of those.
That can do property injection.
Cool.
And we support all of those things.
Awesome.
So I'm going to bring an iLogger factory, which is a new interface that we have in ASP NET 5 and DNX for doing logging. And it has configurable syncs and all those types of goodness. So I'm going to do the same thing here. I'm going to say my logger is equal to loggerfactory.create logger. And I'm going to do it for my home controller. Now, this is just a convenience method, this generic method. It basically creates me a logger whose name is this type name. The name is important because when you log, you generally log a category or like who logged this. And so you can very, very simply just do this. And now I have this logger in here.
I didn't have to pass in a hard-coded string.
I didn't have to put a hard-coded string in there. I could just do this.
That's cool.
So then I can say control dot, do what I did before, generate a read-only field. And of course, I changed my focus, so that didn't work. And now I've got my logger inside here, and I could log something out if I wanted to. OK, So that's DI in a nutshell.
So sometimes when I'm playing with ASP.NET, I feel like in earlier versions, even though the source is like a reference source and it's available, it
Yes.
still kind of feels like there's a wall between me and there.
Yes.
And oftentimes I'll get like an open source library, I'll be doing something in MVC, I can step in, I can see the source, but I can't really change it. You know what I mean?
And this is one of the sort of the bad things about .NET in general, and I don't like saying that, but .NET has a lot of great things, but it also has, when we compare it to things like Ruby and Node, which are JavaScript, those things ship as source.
Right.
So if you bring in something into a Node application, you have the source for that. When you debug it, you just step in. In .NET, we have things like symbols and source stepping. Who's ever tried to get .NET source stepping to work in Visual Studio? Keep your hand up if you got it to work regularly. Yeah, like 1, 2 people have their hands up now. So some of the things we've done in ASP.NET 5 and DNX is we've really thought about that flow. Now, you've all seen that I change a file, I save it in VS, I go back over the browser, I hit F5 without a recompile. That's one of those sort of flow dev things we try to do. What I'm going to show you next is something else that's kind of like that. Now, this is actually a story. I was doing a workshop in New Zealand last week, and I wanted to show off a great new tag helper that we have called the cache tag helper. So I'm going to just undo what I did here. And I'm going to undo what I did here.
And we can tell, of course, from your accent that you are not from New Zealand.
I am not. I am from Australia, actually.
Oh, I was going to say, I thought it was
and
Cleveland.
spent a lot of time in England growing up, so my accent is all over the place. But, okay, so I wanted to show off this new thing called the cache tag helper. So I'm going to go into my index, and I went, okay, let's create an H1, and then I'm going to do something like a hello datetime.now.toLong time string. Okay? And then let's duplicate that so I can prove that one of them is cached and one of them isn't. And then I'm going to wrap the first one in this new cache tag helper.
Mm-hmm. That turned purple.
And that turned purple. You can see that here, right? Purple and bold. And you
that's
can change
not an
those, obviously.
That's not an HTML5 thing.
No, that's an element that I've created or we've created and as a tag helper. So this one won't render a cache tag. This one's behavior is to take everything inside of it and cache it away in memory cache. Okay, and then it has the normal things. I don't really want to drill into this, but you can do expires, you can do vary by, and all those type of good things.
It's a helper.
It's a helper. But if I just use it like this, what I should see is that when I run this app, one of these will stay the same, and the other one will change every time I refresh.
Right.
So, okay, 59, and then I hit F5, and oh.
That totally works.
But herein lies the story. So at this point, I'm on stage. I have 30 or 40 paying customers who've done a workshop. And I'm like, oh, crap. Why doesn't this work? This is Visual Studio RC. This is the template that we shipped.
You're legitimately surprised.
I was legitimately surprised because I just did file new, and I used this great cache tag helper that I want to tell everyone about, and it doesn't work out of the box. So I'm like, what would I normally do in this situation? I want to debug this thing and figure out what's going on.
Like literally, what would you do if you were at work?
If I was at work, I'd go over into the MVC source solution, and I'd open up that, and then I'd try and figure out if it's still working in there. Now, at this point, I'm like, well, I know that works. We have tests. The build would have failed. We wouldn't have shipped it if the cache tag helper itself is broken. But I still need to figure out how to debug this. So we have a good feature for doing this now. So we have this new global JSON file up in here. It's kind of like a quasi-global project JSON. Okay, it has other things in it, but it's at the solution level for a DNX sort of application.
It's not a list of projects, it's a list of places that stuff can be at.
Yeah, and a couple other things,
metadata.
like I can pin a version of the DNX and I'm using those type of things. So I know I have the MVC source here. This is where I clone my stuff to.
And you can get that by just cloning it.
Go to GitHub, clone it with Git, all that type of stuff. And we are looking at building features to make what I'm about to do in the next 2 minutes a one-click operation in Visual Studio, because we're really keen about making this type of workflow really, really nice. So for now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to come in here and I'm going to add that path that I know contains the source code for MVC. And I'm going to go in here and I'm going to change my backslashes to forward slashes because, forward slashes are superior in pretty much every way, especially when you're in JSON.
You think it's better? You think forward slashes are better?
It's better when you're in JSON because I don't like double backslashes, and forward slashes are cross-platform.
Are they cross-platform like that C colon?
No, but thanks for pointing that out. Why did I get you into this talk? I could have done this by myself. People would have still turned up. I kid. Love having you here, mate. Love having you here. Okay, so now people who were keen-eyed may have noticed some stuff going on over in the Solution Explorer. Things are moving. It's alive. What's happened is I've added an extra place for it to do dependency resolution for. Now, what does that mean? It's a big bunch of words. Dependency resolution. We don't generally think about these
Looking
things.
for stuff.
We just think about file, add reference, right? Well, if I go and look at my project.json file, these things are just names. They're only referenced MVC by name. And a version. A version is there as well. But there's no path. I didn't say it was NuGet package. I didn't say it was a DLL. I didn't say it was a project. I just said, find something with this name. And then the process of dependency resolution, which is what the DNX does, is figures out, well, is this a project that I can load, source code? Is it a NuGet package that I have to go and download from a feed? Or is it something else? So because I've added that path, it can now load this as source. And it loads it directly into my solution. So at this point, I have the source code. So I can just do find the cache tag helper. That was control, comma. There's my cache tag helper from MVC. I'm going to go to the process method. And I put my breakpoint here. And then I run my app again. And then it probably fails because I forgot to do a restore. But we'll see whether it holds my hand a little bit and tells me, nope. So I have to come up here and do a manual restore right now.
Is this a bug? Or
this is a bug right now in the way we do restore in this version of VS.
OK. But the name inside of the project.json referred to something he wanted. And there's a whole chain of like, well, it could come from NuGet. It could come from one of the other NuGets in his feed. It could come from something local. It could come from a local NuGet on the disk. Or it could come from source. So he can basically get control of what level of kind of scoping of these projects.
Yes. And so I'm just looking at the package restore process right now, and I'm hoping the internet doesn't make a fool of me. So it's just downloading stuff, and sometimes things get a little slow.
Well, if that happens, then we'll just debug that. And then we'll use that story in the next talk.
In the next talk. Yeah, we could do that. What I might do, just to speed this up.
Do you have the one we did last night?
No, what I might do to speed this up, I'm just going to turn off that feed.
The one you're not feeling good about?
I don't need that feed.
OK.
And then I'm going to come in here. I'm going to open my project.json and force.
So this is just like an internet is slow thing?
Internet is slow thing.
OK.
And I'm going to have to close it because it is stuck in the other one. Let's open that one up again.
And the next version of NuGet has some speed features as well, I understand.
Yeah, so the NuGet version 3 feed, which DNX, the current version doesn't support, the current beta we have, is much faster. So that's now restored properly.
All right.
My breakpoint is still set, so I'm going to hit F5.
All right. Were you nervous?
No, I knew what was going on.
Good.
But you know, I would have appreciated not losing that minute if I could have avoided it, but that's OK.
What about this minute right here?
This minute right here where I wait for it to
When
boot
we're
up.
talking?
Yeah.
That minute?
OK, so here I am inside my cache tag helper. So my hunch was, now when you think about how cache works, we generate a key, which is just a big string, right? And then we put something in there, the next time comes around, we generate the key again, and we ask the cache, do you already have this item? I was pretty confident it was generating the key correctly, because like I said, we have tests and things. So I figured what it was this object here, this memory cache property. This is dependency injected in, okay, like we talked about before. And my hunch was that this memory cache object wasn't going to be the same one when I ran it the second time. My hunch was that someone was replacing it each time the cache tag helper ran.
Memory caches have got to be singletons. They've got to be just one of them.
Exactly. It needs to at least be shared between multiple calls, right? Otherwise, what are you actually caching? So I'm going to add that to my watch window here. Memory cache. Boop. So there's my memory cache, and I'm going to right mouse click on that, and I'm going to say make object ID. Okay, so what that's done is put a $1 after that. And that's a unique instance ID for this object instance of that class.
How many people use make object ID all the time?
5,
7
6,
people.
7.
How many people are now going to use it all the time?
Okay.
Good night, everybody. Welcome.
So we'll continue running the page. I can see my bug is there. So I'm going to hit F5 again.
Okay.
And look at that. 2 things have happened that instantly makes it.
Where's the $1?
$1 is gone because that instance had an ID. This new one doesn't because I haven't right mouse clicked.
You put a post-it note on that instance,
Correct.
and that's a different guy.
That's a different guy. So now I know I have a bug. Now it also went red, which is what tells you that it changed between the 2 things.
Right.
So I know the bug isn't in the cache tag helper. Okay, at this point, the bug is in someone who's setting up DI. So I can remove this breakpoint, and we'll stop debugging. And I'm going to go off and debug my startup process instead, and we'll debug the setting up of DI. Now, this is one of the dirty secrets of using DI, is that you need to understand what's going into the container, who put it in there, and what lifetime it went in for. So I'm going to show you quickly how you can debug the DI.
DI makes things easier, but it doesn't allow you to be willfully ignorant.
It's a
what's
layer of
going on.
abstraction away from who's newing up objects. So you
Right.
have to have an understanding of who's actually doing that,
Yep.
especially when you hit issues like this. So now I'm in my startup method, configuring the DI container with the things that can be resolved later. Okay?
Loggers, memory, database stuff, all the things that one would
All
need.
the things that are used by the systems in ASP.NET.
Okay.
So I'm going to pop the descriptors. Service. This is my services that's passed in, and then it has a private field called descriptors. I'm going to add that to watch.
So there's 19
There's
of them.
19 things in there right now. So these are just the things that came from the DNX itself, right? iApplication environment, iHosting environment. I
Loggers
know
in
there's
there.
no caching in there, right? I just know, because I know the system there's no caching. I could have looked at that.
But
and
you
said,
could
"Oh,
look
there's no
and see.
caching."
I see logging, and that's
I just
about
scroll down. It's just logging a couple of things. I know this line doesn't do it because this is just adding one thing to the container, which is my class from this application, the app settings class. And we'll see that go up to 20, which it did. So now we get into the real meat and potatoes, right? Now we're going to add entity framework. This is going to add all the stuff required to get EF running in my app. So I hit
Which
EF
is
10.
a lot of stuff,
Well, now there's 104,
right?
all right? This
Which is not a bad thing.
It's not a bad thing
but
at all.
Talking to database is non-trivial.
So now I'm going to just scroll down. I'm just going to eyeball it. I'm going to scroll down and go, okay, somewhere in here, Microsoft Data, Microsoft, I'm looking for Microsoft Framework caching. There it is, iMemory cache. And look,
Transient.
transient. So there's the bug. The
Not
bug is
singleton.
what's that?
Not singleton.
Not singleton. I want that to be singleton.
Transient means every request gets a new one?
And not every request. That would be scoped. Transient means anytime anyone asks for one. So if you could just do 2 method calls, give me that, and then give me that again, you'll get 2 different ones.
Got it.
All right, so I know where the bug is now. Now, I could bring in the EF source code, and I could try and debug that, but you know what? I know this stuff is on GitHub. I think at this point, I could probably just go up here, and I could go up to the GitHub repository, and I could actually type it in correctly.
Okay.
Doot, doot, doot. And then I could do a search up here, and I just search for iMemory cache, which is the interface that I know. There's only 2 places using iMemory cache in all of the EF source code. And look at that, transient.
Zoom in.
So I'll find it in here,
Okay.
and I'll do iMemory cache. There it is. So there it is there. Add transient memory cache, which is being done by EF.
Who
Now, I'm
did
sure they
that?
had a good problem for that. But I'm like, well, now I know where the line is, but I kind of want to understand how we got here, because how did we ship with this bug?
Yeah.
I'm admitting we shipped with a bug, because we do that all the time. We're just human. So I'm going to hit this button. And bear in mind, I did this last week when I was in New Zealand. And then I went, okay, so this was done by Andrew on our team. Lovely guy, but he is a Kiwi. So it was kind of poignant that I was foiled by a Kiwi while I was in New Zealand. But at this point, I have the line of code. I know where it is. I went off and created an issue on stage, on GitHub. And I said, look, here's the line of code. We probably shouldn't
You
have done
filed
this.
the bug on
I filed a
stage.
bug, yeah, absolutely.
That's what people need to do.
That's what people need to do. So I've used the tools that we've built to now make it very easy to debug stuff
But is
inside
this
the S.
blocking? Like we've hit bugs at work before, and we're like, oh, well, we're screwed. I guess we'll wait
No.
until the next version of ASP.NET.
So then how did I fix it? I wanted my demo to work, right? So let's come back. I know the problem is here, so all I have to do is get in before it. Services.add singleton, iMemory cache. I need to bring that in. Memory cache. And that's it. Whoever gets to do it first, because all of our frameworks do a try-add instead of an add, they check to see if it's there already. Because I'm going to add it as singleton, I'm going to win. So now, if I run that, compiling, launching, thinking, there we go.
There we go.
Hopefully this time when I hit F5 with that one line of change, now we can see one of them stays the same and one of them is actually cached by the tag helper. And to use what you would say, he sticks the landing.
You stick the landing.
Stick the landing.
Nicely done, sir.
So we finally found. So yeah, there's some really, I just want people to understand that when we talk about building ASP.NET 5 as open source, and the DNX as open source, and .NET as open source, it's not just about the source being open. It's not just about you being able to clone it, build it yourself, make a change, and send contributions. We want you to be able to feel like you're using open source code, that it's your code as much as it is ours. And so we're going to improve this flow. It's still a little bit hacky right now.
Right, because I'd like to be able to go into references, right-click, and say, get that.
Imagine if I could drill into here.
Yeah, yeah. And then you got a little NuGet thing.
And see,
Oh,
notice.
look, wait a second.
See, notice how it changed?
Those are local.
Yeah, so that means project reference. And the other ones are NuGet references. Now, before, if I'd shown this, they would have been a NuGet reference and it changed. But wouldn't it be nice if I could just right mouse click on here and say, switch to source? And then it asked you, where do you want to clone it to?
Do you want that? Yes? All right, we'll do that.
We will do that.
We'll do that.
We will do that.
We are this many behind.
Okay.
So we'll do that one.
What do you want us to do next then?
Do that one.
Class library?
Yes, sir.
Awesome. All right, let's close all these files. I'm going to add a, well, we won't use this one because it's full of MVC now.
Now, how would you get rid of it? You just,
Well, that's a good
just
point.
remove it.
Yeah, I can do that.
I mean, just to be clear.
It is literally two things.
So you get rid of that,
Do that
because we don't need all this source now.
and delete that.
Okay? And then that's it.
That's it. I'm back to where I was.
And it'll get it from NuGet. And
that was
can
much
actually go
quicker.
into the references. Did they switch into little NuGet-y things?
They will have,
Boom.
yep, now they're back to being
Sweet.
MVC. Yep. So there you go. All right, so let's add
They're
a class
applauding in
library.
the other room.
I know, man.
I just think you did a great job.
It's a little delayed, though.
It was a little delayed.
Yeah,
It took them a while to get it because they're in the other room.
I'm going to believe that was for us.
It was totally for
I'm
us.
going to believe that was for us. All right, so we also have a new class library project, okay? And you'll notice that this one says class library package. This is a class library built on top of the exact same project system that the DNX web project system is using.
I see. So I'm going to get a project.json, not a CSproj.
Exactly. And it's actually the same project system. Like, it is literally identical. The only two things that separate them is in one of them, there was a property in project.json called webroot that told it this is where you find web files. And that was it. Otherwise, it is a DNX project. That's all it really is. So I'm going to create one of these, and we'll call it class library 1 because I can't think of a witty name right now. And so what's interesting about building class libraries is that this project produces a NuGet package. Now, I can add a reference to it just as I would anything else. I can come over here. I can say add reference. You know, it looks just like it does today. I can add class 1, come over here.
So it's familiar. People
It's
don't have
familiar.
to freak
If I go
out.
down to project.json now, you'll see that it added class library 1. And as we said before, it's just a name. It doesn't know at this point if it's a NuGet package or a project or anything else, but it obviously gets resolved as a package, as a project, because I have it next to my, my other project there. Okay. One of the things we do by default in both of our project templates, if I open my project.json, look at this framework section here. I'll just collapse that. Our project system, the DNX, can build for multiple frameworks simultaneously. Who has ever had to build the same source code against two sets of sort of .NET worlds, maybe Windows Phone and .NET 4.5, okay? Or
I had to do that
Silverlight.
I had to do that between 2.0 and 3.5.
Even 2.0 and 3.5, and you would do the if-def, right? You have the
if-def my way to glory.
If-def your way to glory, absolutely. But the way you would do that is you would have one set of files in one project, and then you have a second project that was set up as like a WinPhone project, and you would link those files into the other one. So you have two projects now in your solution, although you really only have one set of code. Well, we've merged that into one thing. We've made that a first-class concept, and we borrowed heavily from the work done by the Universal Projects system, you know, the shared project stuff they did last year, to get a lot of cool features out of that. So if I come over here into my class, we can see some of the benefits of that. Up here in the, not that one, up here in the top left in my C# file, I have this switcher that lets me switch context. So for every framework that I add in my project.json file, I'll get a new context. In fact, if I come down here, and let's say I also want to build this for .NET 4.5.1. All right, save that, save that. Notice now that .NET Framework 4.5.1 showed up in there. So now I'm compiling 3 times when I build this code.
And the difference here is using the DNX environment on 4.5.1
Correct.
versus just 4.5.1 the way we did it yesterday.
I remember the DNX does a bunch of things. It boots your app, but it also compiles your app. So this is DNX booting 4.5.1 and compiling it for that world versus DNX booting it for core. Now, dirty little secret. When you do it this way, it's still the DNX doing it. It's just that it uses a different set of reference assemblies. It uses the real .NET 4 framework, 4.5.1 reference assemblies. Okay, so when I'm writing code this way, though, eventually I'm going to hit some seams. And people often ask me, so we have this .NET Core thing, and we have .NET Framework. .NET Core is the new hotness. It goes on Linux and Mac. It's cross-plat. It's portable. I can make it Xcopy deployable with my app. But it doesn't have everything that's in the .NET Framework. What happens if I hit one of these seams where something is missing or we've moved something around? So I happen to know that there's one thing that we've moved around, which is how you set the culture for the current thread.
Internationalization.
Internationalization, right? Okay. So let's say in the constructor of this ridiculous class, I'm going to set the culture. Okay. So I could do thread. I'm going to do control dot. Now, look at this.
Ooh, this is interesting because we talked about how before the .NET Framework was this monolith.
Right.
And now you're literally saying that system.threading is just a piece. It really is a cafeteria plan
When you're on .NET Core.
when you're on .NET Core.
Yes. So if I did using system.threading, this would work for .NET Framework.
Yes.
But if I wanted to use everywhere, I need to pull in this package that lights up that thread API on all the frameworks.
Right. So
all the
your
versions
app
of
really
.NET that
only
work.
ships and uses what it needs and nothing else. You don't
Absolutely.
need that threading thing. It doesn't even show up when you
Absolutely.
deploy
And
the
you
app.
can see over here, if I go back to my project JSON file, there it is. It's added system.threading as a dependency of that thing down there. Okay, so I can say current thread dot current culture. But you'll note, if you look at the IntelliSense here, see, it's telling me, I've got this little warning triangle in the statement completion. And it's saying, hey, this method is available in 2 of those frameworks, or this property, but not in the last one. We call this combined IntelliSense. You're getting IntelliSense for all target frameworks at the same time while you're in the file. Okay?
Nice.
Then again, these are all tools to help you in this world of, hey, I'm trying to move some .NET 4.5 code over to .NET Core. We're building tools to help you do that.
How would I go and figure out what I should do? Like, I'm panicking at this point, and I'm like, well, I need that, though.
Yeah, so that's a really good question. At the moment, the bringing in the package was one of the things we did. So if we didn't have that, you may be trying to use and go, well, that API doesn't exist.
Right.
Where is it? It's in a package. I don't know where it is. So we added that stuff. In terms of the case here where you find an API difference, that unfortunately will just be documentation right now, which is a little early on because we're still at beta 4 and all those type of things.
Of course.
But I can tell you I know how to do that. So I'm going to say new culture info, and that's going to screw me up. There we go. And we'll do en-au. And so now I'm setting the current culture to that. Now, if I try and build this project now, I get an error. But note the project name over here. It says thread does not contain a definition for current culture.
Oh, it's a project context.
Project context. Now remember, it gave me the warning. It said this API isn't available on one of them. So, okay, I need to fix this. I've hit one of those seams between the 2 worlds. So I can use an if-def. And I will admit, this experience of if-defs isn't the best one. I think we have a little bit of work to do here to make this a really nice experience because if-defs are going to be a bit more common now.
Right.
So I'm going to say DNX core 50, which is the symbol we use to represent when I'm on that. And then I'm going to say else, and I'll do the rest of that down there. So in this case, I've got this backwards, so I need to move this code out of there and put that down there. Okay? And then I need to switch. I'm going to switch over to this context, .NET Core 50, or DNX Core 50.
And why is it important to switch contexts?
Because note how it went gray.
Right.
This is one of the things I don't like about this experience right now.
Okay.
What I would rather us do is that if I put my cursor in here, that becomes the active context. Yeah. So anyway, we're still working on this, but right now you just kind of have to understand that you need to do, sometimes you have to do.
I don't think I'm that smart. I like it this way.
You like it this way?
Well, if I think that just by virtue of my cursor being in a different place, I would be confused.
Yeah, I don't know. So the other thing that you don't see right now is, notice before when I had this out of it, when I had this over here.
Yeah.
Right, if I move this outside.
You could just switch contexts.
No, I want to actually move it out into here, so it's all context. This is showing me an error here because I switched context. If I do this, you know what? I want to see that squiggly, even though I'm not in that context right now. I want to know that I have an error.
Different colored squiggly.
I could do a different color squiggly. Now, if you view Visual Studio Code, it does what I'm saying. It actually shows you squigglies and errors for all target frameworks that you're compiling for at the same time. And I actually think that's a slightly better experience.
Interesting.
But I digress. Let's put this back in here where I know it will work. And then I happen to know that to do this on then I want, you still get IntelliSense in here now, which is kind of cool.
Never you get that. IntelliSense in your gray text.
Yes.
That's cool. So culture info is sitting already. Did it get pulled in via DI or what?
Let me switch context to get all of it working, and then we'll actually delve. Again, see, I don't get errors because I'm in there, which I think is a little bit clumsy. So I'm going to do control dot.
Oh, I see. Okay, that's a valid point. You didn't see anything, no hint. So I was like, oh, it works.
Yeah.
Because it's gray and it's not freaking out.
It's not actually, it wasn't actually working. And now it's lying at me. It's getting a little angry. Let me try and close them. Oh, I have reference errors. That's interesting.
What does that mean?
So it means something went wrong during reference. I'm going to delete this just so I don't go far too off script. And we'll check out what the errors are. It's saying it exists in this package, also in this package. So I've brought in a little bit too much. I'm going to get rid of that. I'm going to go back to here. I'm going to come to here. And I'm going to say that. And I might be hitting a seam in our experience right now, actually. It might be trying to bring the package into the wrong area.
In the wrong context?
Into too many places. So I'm going to put this down here.
So
see if that fixes it.
It's interesting because you've got dependencies, which is everybody's dependencies, and then under frameworks, he's got dependencies just for this thing.
Absolutely.
So for example, if you were doing, like right now we don't have a graphics generator in core. So let's say that you are doing check imaging for a bank or whatever, and then you're moving that over from full framework to core, and like, oh, I just hit a seam. You're going to need to go and find a core framework library that does that imaging, build a layer of abstraction on top of it, and then if-def around that. But you wouldn't want to take that library, that new imaging library, and reference it in the full framework version. So that would become something that would go under the dependency. So you'd say the dependencies that are shared are here, and then the ones for this framework are here, and the ones for this framework are there. So you're basically getting references that are specific to the target framework that you want to use.
Absolutely. I think I have a indexing bug in my NuGet, so it's
so
bringing the wrong one, but that's fine.
Pretend it's working and there's no
Pretend it's working,
squigglies.
absolutely. So what I've done here is I know I have in .NET Core, this is the API that you use now to set the current culture.
It's actually where does it come from? It's just in threading. It's a different namespace?
It's in system.globalization. Like it's a package that you pull in.
Okay, so it's not in, it's in system.globalization. This threading current culture.
That is the one that exists in .NET today.
Got it.
And that's in a namespace.
So something moved for a good reason.
Something moved for a good reason. And you can track these movements. The .NET team has been very good about publishing their API reviews. And they have good status documentation up on GitHub where they talk about as they move these things around and why they're doing it.
There's even some interesting videos where you can see the .NET Core team arguing about this stuff with new people who've been at the company a couple years and people that have been at the company 15, 20 years. Some with historical context, some with a future focus, arguing in a room with a whiteboard. So if you like that kind of nerdy stuff, we've got hours of video for you to check out.
It's like Twitch for developers.
Yeah, it's like Twitch for developers.
Except we're not actually coding, we're just yelling at each other.
And we have no fitness.
And we have no fitness.
We're just kind of sitting around.
Okay, so when I build this, we've said before, we don't actually get anything when we build this, right? So I'm going to...
Well, there's no bin folder, there's no bin debug, right?
Well, let's have a look. So here's my file. Yeah, there's no bin folder right now.
Okay, where is my DLL?
How do I get stuff? Well, to do that in VS,
okay.
I go into the properties of the project, and then I go over to build, and I tick the magic tick box.
I'm sorry. So why wouldn't I want outputs on a build anyway?
Because we build from source. So if I'm only ever using this class library in the context of this solution, there's no need for me to produce outputs here.
I appreciate the design work that was done on this particular property. Could it be just a giant square?
It could.
Just a big wheel. Okay, so make stuff. You
Note
push
to
that
self,
check
get
button.
you to the design meetings and when we do this stuff. Okay.
Well, it's not even like in the corner. Like it's okay, so then when you hit Control-Shift-B, will it just appear?
So I've built that now, but it still hasn't turned up in there. We actually build to a different location now. So I'm going to flip back. Here's my root of my application. Note this artifacts folder. So we're kind of we're being opinionated about solution folder layout in DNX because we think this is cleaner. And it also maps very well to if you just want to put this in something like GitHub or your source control. Well, this is a really nice structure.
It's funny that you do that because when I was working in the banks with these large systems with 20, 30, 40 solutions, it'd be like bin debug, bin debug, bin, you know, and I would go and write like prune.
To delete them all.
Yeah, to delete all that crap.
So we've made some decisions about where things go. So there's my bin folder, class library 1, debug, and there's my package.
I was just going to say, and there's my DLL, but no, that's not even in there either. There's a NuGet.
Yep. Now the DLLs are there in a different folder. Now this is complaining that I haven't filled in author and description. That's a bug in our template, so I can go and fix that. Go to project.json. Where you would have previously put these things in a new spec file or in your assembly info file, it's combined now because NuGets and assemblies for DNX are effectively the same thing.
So I don't even have to make a new spec.
You don't have to make a new spec. We do everything that you would do in a new spec is gleaned from this project.json file.
Nice.
So I'm going to call this hello build, and we'll say that it's made by me. And then we'll build this again. We'll go back here. Timestamp flips over. I'll open it again. And so here it is. Who uses NuGet Package Explorer? Everyone know about NuGet Package Explorer? Okay, good. It's on Codeplex.
Go get it. It's a little click once application, and it makes nice little icons for your, and it pains me to say this, for your nupkegs.
For your nupkegs.
And
oh, come on. How else do you pronounce that?
Nupkage.
That is nutkeg in any language, my friend. Even American. Okay, so my NuGet package has inside of it those 2 folders and the assemblies from, so there's my assemblies.
And I recognize those strings.
Yes, DNX451 and DNX450.
Those are meaningful. They show up everywhere. They're well-known strings.
They are well-known strings. They are called target framework monikers, which is a fancy way of saying the name of the framework you're compiling for. Okay? The acronym we use is TFMs. So if you ever look at our docs or you look at check-in comments or stuff like that, and we talk about TFMs, this is what we're talking about. Target framework monikers, the names of the framework you're compiling for. So there's my NuGet package. So at this point, I can push that to a feed. I can do whatever I want with that. And as I said, if I'd had other target frameworks in here, I could have built a much more complicated NuGet package. Like if you've looked at JSON.NET, it has like 15 of these things in here, a bunch of portable libraries.
It's kind of like the canonical example. It's just like if you go just to the command line, NuGet install newtonsoft.json and open up the zip file. He's gone and done all that work, but he went and had to actually
He did it manually.
Manually do all that.
Manual new spec file, manual build process, take the DLLs, move them into a separate folder during a script, write a whole script to do that.
But the benefit is that you go into a project of any kind and you get JSON.NET and you get a good one and you don't think about it.
No.
It just works.
It just works. All right, so how would I do that from the command line? I just said you could do that as part of the build process or something. Obviously, you're not going to do this in VS. So let's jump out to here. Grab that path. I'm going to come back here. We'll do this. We'll do that.
In Windows 10, you can control
I can know. I don't have to do the
that's
fancy
good.
ninja keystroke anymore. I'm going to go in here. Oops. OK, and then here I can type dnu build. That just does a build, right? It doesn't really do anything. It just checks stuff. If I want to produce a package, if I do dnu, you'll see there's a dnu pack. So if I do dnu pack, that does the same thing.
So pack makes artifacts.
Pack makes packages.
Makes packages.
Yes. And you can see it actually says this here. It says class library
dnu
1.
build didn't make packages.
dnu build ran a build and gave me errors.
Spell check.
So as you often say, compilation is just the first unit test.
That's true.
And that's what dnu build is. Does it compile? Yes. I don't want anything out of it. Just tell me if it compiles or not. That's what dnu build does.
Nice.
dnu pack produces those packages, and you can see it put the path down there too. Now I could obviously give it an extra argument, which is where I want that to go and all those type of things. But the point is I can do that from the
Well, and this
command
also
line.
makes that dependency chain really nice, because when I used to work with all these large systems, I had all those bins. My bins would become someone else's lib, and then their organization would build, and they'd go into their bins, and it would flow like that.
We used to call that dependency replication where I worked. So you have something that I depend on. We need to replicate that over here. Then I build something that he depends on, and it goes on.
And it all works until the one in the middle changes the version number.
Right, or you forget to update that version or whatever it might be. OK, so that's class libraries.
Cool.
Very, very cool. Let's jump into looking at, let's build a tag helper.
Okay.
OK, because I know my boss and your boss promised everyone
Okay.
we would build a tag
And then we
helper.
should do that, because we promised.
Yes, that can be the finale. So I'm going to come back into this application, the one I used the cache tag helper in before, and I'm going to create a tag helper. I'll create a folder called tag helpers. Heckers.
Is that important, the name of the
No,
folder?
I mean, this is just where do you want to put your class that represents the
Just
tag
wondering.
helper?
There's a lot of magic strings, so it's important to remember what is a...
Very good point. I'll show you how you have to import these in just a moment. There's no convention for how we find those. You have to actually declare where they are.
Okay.
So we're going to call this a repeat tag helper, and no prizes for guessing what it's going to do. So all your tag helper has to do is actually implement an interface. We do have a base class, but if I just jump over to the interface, who's ever tried to write a web forms control? Not a user control, an actual control. Who's ever done that? Come on, don't be afraid. Like, .NET's been out 16 years. It's OK if you wrote a web forms control.
It's a safe place.
Lots of people.
That's hard.
This is the interface for a tag helper. It has an order property, because you can have multiple tag helpers run per element.
Right.
And it has a process method. And that's it. My promise to everyone here is that we shall never add lifecycle method. There will be no pre-init and a init and a post-init and a pre-render and a render and ready and a data bind and do child controls and then do pre-blah.
Right. And the pre-workout and the post-workout,
The post-
post-workout,
and then
total
the-
down, yeah.
You laugh, we actually have a pre-pre in some places as well. We have process, okay? That's all it is.
This is not web forms.
This is not web forms. You get a context, which gives you details about the element that was in the CSHTML file that you're running on. In this case, the cache, it would have been the cache element. What attributes? Then you have output, which is what you render to. Okay? And if there is more than one tag helper currently running on an element, which is what the order is for, These are stateful. These are shared. So they cascade from one tag helper to the other. And that means you can write tag helpers that actually coordinate with each other for more complex scenarios. But I'm not going to go in that today. We're going to write a simple one just to get you started. All right, so let's go back here. I'm going to use the base class. And then I'm going to come down here. I'm going to override my process async method, because I'm actually going to do something async. We'll make this async. You don't have to worry about calling any base methods, even though we're using inheritance here. Don't worry. We're trying to make this as low friction as possible. There's no constructor you have to override or anything like that. I'm going to add a property to here. And it's going to be an int. I'm going to call it count. And I'm going to put that in the right spot. OK, so that's the minimum I'm going to do for right now. And then we're going to go off and actually register this. So little thing about naming. By default, the HTML element name that this will attach to is derived from the name of the class. Okay, there's a convention. We strip the word tag helper off the end of your class, and then we just take what was left. So I have now created a repeat element. If I wanted to attach to an attribute instead, I could do that as well. I can come up here and say target element, and then I could say attributes equals, and then I can say what I actually want is to create one called like demo repeat. And then this tag helper will apply to any element that has an attribute called demo repeat. Okay, makes sense? If you ever use Angular directives, it's a little bit similar to that. I was greatly inspired by Angular directives and web components.
So it's server-side in this case.
But it's all server-side, yep. Okay, so we'll just leave this as a discrete element for now. I now have to tell Razor where to find this. So I'm going to go down to this new file, global import, and I'll explain a little bit about what that is. So we all know what view start is, right? View start is code that runs in the view before anything else. I think I tried to move. Global import is where you can put Razor directives that get inherited by all your views. Because what's in view start is imperative, and what's in global import is declarative. Okay? Directives in Razor, I keep using this word, directives are things that affect parsing. Okay? They don't emit code. They affect how the file gets parsed. A using statement is there because it gets added to the top when we parse the file to figure out what stuff you're calling. And an add tag helper says, well, OK, when I'm parsing HTML elements, check those element names and attributes against these tag helpers. Okay? So I have to add one of these for my own. So I've called this web application 14. 41. You're supposed
So
to
I could make, I'm supposed to be helping you?
You're supposed to help me when I make
Sure.
those mistakes before I do it.
I'm just letting you twist. So I can make tag helpers, produce artifacts, give them to, as nupcakes, to my coworkers, and then they go in there and they use them and consume them.
Yes, absolutely. And you can put them in a NuGet package, for example. Put them on an internal feed.
And
bring them
maybe
in via that.
someone in the community will make the world's great
I
tag helper
absolutely
library.
hope that that's what happens. So now that I've come back into my index.cshtml and I type RE, note that I now get IntelliSense immediately for that. So all those people who had built web forms controls, who then battled with the VS Editor to try and get them to show up after you'd built them, that just works first time right now, which is nice. And it will get better. The moment you have to close the file and reopen it if you create a new tag helper. Okay? But I'm hoping that over time we'll get that a little bit better. So there's my count property. My property shows up as an attribute. And I can change the name of that with an attribute in the C# class and all that type of stuff. And note that I declared it as what? An int. It wasn't a string. This is actual C#. So if I hit Control space here, I'm in C#. So tag helpers don't fundamentally change Razor.
Hang on. Go ahead.
That was nice. What is Razor as a templating language when it comes down to it?
Right.
What defines a templating language? It has an opinionated way of doing something. Spark does something one way. Enamel does something one way. Razor is about taking C# and HTML and munging them together with as few seams as possible. Now, previously, we did that with the @ character. You would say @ blah, and you would call a helper, and then it would return guff, and then off you would go, right? We've just gone one step further and said, well, why can't we just go HTML attribute equals blah and have that blah be C# without me having to switch transition, okay? For tag helpers, that's what we've done. That's what we built in order to enable that. So this has to be, a number. If I try and put something in here that isn't a number, like datetime.now, and then I close this out so I can finish parsing, and then I wait while I get an error. Because it's C#, right? So let's go back here, and I'm going to make this one. Now, if I did have a variable, if I declared var foo or whatever, that would be in scope here. I could just do foo, if it's on the model or whatever. So I haven't actually implemented anything yet, right? So let's go and implement the rest of this helper, which is pretty straightforward. So all I need to do is I'm going to say if count is let's do that again from scratch. if count is less than or equal to 0, I'm going to return, because I don't want to do anything, being nice and defensive. Otherwise, I'm going to do a for loop, and I'm going to say for count, and I'm going to call var content equals await, and then on the context object that's passed in, there's this method here, get child content async. Get me all the content inside the element. Execute that razor now. It hasn't executed yet. By the time this process method is running.
So that'll start up, and they'll keep parsing and chaining everything together.
Right.
And then let you know at the last, and then you'll release to whoever's above you.
So it's a stack. And we pop the stack as we go down and then unwind through the hierarchy of the HTML elements. Now, this method is memoized, so it's only going to run once. So I can just call it safely in here and I'll actually get the same.
This method is what?
Memoized.
Memoized.
Basically, it's like an idempotent method. You call it once, you get the same result.
So you just
over and over
explained a complicated word with another complicated word.
It caches the result internally.
Oh. Thank you.
But now people can look up a memoir. Never mind.
They don't want homework. They want to get it done.
All right. We're all computer scientists, aren't we? All right, so then I'm going to come in here, and I'm going to actually append stuff to the output. So I'm going to say output.content.append that content. Now, we've been very careful with how we built tag helpers in terms of buffering. Mm-hmm. Right, we want to make sure that we don't just end up creating a huge giant string and then push it out.
That's my fear then.
Right, so this output object here is actually of type tag helper output. And when you call content, that's not a string. That says append for a reason. That is of type tag helper content thing. It's a thing. It's a
okay.
Custom data structure that knows how to do the right thing.
It's not string builders all the way down.
It's not string builders. It's a custom one that we make sure that the strings never get over a certain size and all that type of stuff.
Okay.
So that's all I should have to do, right? So let's go back. I'm already running this. Let's just do Control F5. So now I think I did a 2,
yep.
Right? So I should see it twice. Now I see it twice. Now that actually looks exactly like it did before, but just to prove it to you. And it's repeated it 3 times. Okay? Perfect.
I just wanted to write some code during this talk.
Achievement unlocked.
Do you want to do that?
So that's how easy it is to build a tag helper. Let's very quickly do commands in the last 2 minutes.
2 minutes?
Last 2.5 minutes.
Challenge.
I'm not saying we're going to finish.
You have 2 minutes 20. Go.
Oh, my God. All right. The demo gods have smite me. All right. I'm going to do a DNX console application. Smoot.
Smoot?
Smoot.
Past tense of smite? Smote?
Smited.
Smooted.
Besmit.
Besmit. Maybe in the Commonwealth.
So I created everything in the Commonwealth. I've created a console app. I'm going to open the project.json file. Note that it created a command for me that is itself. There's a bit of inception going on here. A console app in DNX is just a DNX app, a web app. It's the same type of thing, a class library. It's no different. It's the same thing that has a command configured to run itself. This is my entry point.
You've declared your entry point.
I have declared my entry point. So I have a program CS with a static void main. Now, in this case, it's actually not static. It's an instance one. We actually support instance mains now, which is kind of nice. So we can do things like dependency injection into your constructor. And if I want to run this from the command line, now, if I do it from VS, obviously, it's going to run a particular way. But let me go back out here. I'm going to turn on the magic button. Build this. Okay. Now, did I actually make it do anything? I probably should write something out, right?
Yeah.
Console.writeLine. I actually have...
Maybe some ASCII or something better.
I do have something nice here. That looks pretty good. We'll come over here. I'll put that here. Okay, if I run that just to prove that it works.
I'll be impressed that you nailed it in the first try.
Look at that,
wow.
Perfect. So now I'm building that out to the command line, right? So I want to run this as a command from the command line. So let's open that in a folder.
Okay, so you just ran it as a command line app, a regular command.
I ran it from VS.
From VS.
Right, so DNX booted that for me. Right. I want to prove that this is actually a standalone thing. So I'm going to do this.
And when you think about commands, these are commands like if you're familiar with Node, you've got like grunt and express and things like that. They are utilities, commands that are available, possibly globally that you might want to use, and then publish those somewhere. So you all could make commands that then we could go and NuGet in to our web applications and then use as utilities.
So I've gone into the app folder inside Artifacts. There's this folder all the way down here, and note there's my CMD file,
Yep.
console17 command. So I can run console17.cmd from here, and there's hello build running at the command line. Right. But it's also a NuGet package, right? So if I come back out here,
You have negative 20 seconds.
come back out here. I went too far. Oh my God, I went too far. There it is. The NuGet package now is not going to work because I didn't put the things in. That has those CMD files in it. All right? The CMD files are in that
totally
NuGet package.
believe you.
You totally believe me, don't you? Negative 20 seconds. Go. It has those files in it. I'm going to fix this because I want to show you.
Lights are coming up. They're going to start playing like music and kicking us out. Somebody push stop on the recording. 10 seconds.
Okay, let's do it.
Go.
Let's build.
Almost done, guys in the back.
Come over here. Build. It's updated. Open it again.
The union guys have left.
So my NuGet package now has an app folder with a command. If I put that on NuGet and I install that with DNU, I can install that as a global command on my system because it'll add this to my user path.
NuGetable tools at the command line.
Right, and then I can run this from anywhere on my system.
ASP.NET Deep Dive. Damien Edwards.
Thank you, sir.